So in December of last year, I told my friends I was going to go out and buy me a Triumph motorcycle. They all kind of looked at me like I was crazy. I'd ridden a Harley for 18 years and had owned every bike you could possibly imagine from the Big Four. And I think all of them envisioned in their mind maybe a Triumph Bonneville, something like that, something a little more retro, something slow, something for an old guy. But I got something a little different, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons of that decision right after this. So in December of 2018, I had found myself looking for a motorcycle. I'd saved my pennies and scraped them all together to make sure that I didn't have to either finance a lot or possibly pay cash for a bike if I found the right one. Well, I had looked at everything from Bonnevilles to Speed Triples to BMWs to you name it. I pretty much looked at it. I looked at a lot of the naked bikes in from the Big Four. I'd looked some at the KTMs and the Aprilias, but they were a little out of my price range. So I kept going back to this one motorcycle that I saw at the local dealership. It was a 2015 Triumph Speed Triple. Now I knew a little bit about the bike because I'd had a friend of mine who had had a Triple way back in the day when the first generation came out. He loved his, and I remember riding it and thinking it was pretty amazing. I had a Harley at the time, and although my Harley was a great fun bike, it just didn't have that snap that the Triple had. And I remembered the fun that I experienced when riding that bike. So I went into the dealership and I talked to the owner. I was kind of leery about asking him what I needed to ask him. I shot him a low ball offer because the bike was basically a 4-year-old motorcycle sitting on the showroom floor. I really didn't expect him to take the offer, and honestly, I felt like I had insulted him. However, he came back with a counteroffer, and so did I, and so did he, and so did I. And to make a long story short, that day I purchased that Speed Triple. He delivered it to my home that night, and my wife had only seen me ride a Harley. I'd ridden one for 18 years. And she had one thing to say as he was pulling that bike off the truck. That thing looked scary. And I guess to an unknowing eye, it certainly does. So let's talk about the 2015 Speed Triple. First off, I bought a bike that was new, but really not new, because bikes have changed a lot in the last 4 years. This bike didn't have ride-by-wire, no TFT screen, no rider modes, none of those niceties, which automatically made the bike a little less desirable for the average public. I, in fact, though, found that a plus, because I'm an old school guy, because I'm an old guy. But a little bit about the bike. First off, the bike itself is 1,050 cc's. It's a great bike. Plenty of power for me. It's a chain drive, single-sided swing arm, and the geometry fits me pretty well. Power-wise, it had way more than anything I had ever owned. It had 135 brake horsepower and 111 newton meters of torque. That's pretty powerful, especially for somebody like me. I had never ridden anything with that kind of power. I came from the sport bike days in the late 80s, and I had the old Katana and things like that, and they were super powerful for me then. But this bike, nothing holds a candle to it that I've ever owned. And one of the features that it did have that I really did like was ABS. ABS was something I'd never had on a motorcycle either. So that was a very pleasant surprise the first time I really had to make a real quick stop. So owning a Triumph Speed Triple on this side of the pond, what's it like in America to own a European motorcycle? Well, first off, I will tell you that the quality of the bike is something that I find quite amazing. The motorcycle, the fit and finish, everything on the bike is absolutely top notch. So I'm going to get that right out of the way. It looks and rides and feels as good or better than anything I've ever owned. Not to be putting anything else down, but I'm certainly lifting this up and letting people know, if you've heard anyone say that the Triumphs or whatever are junk, they're lying to you, or they've just read it in a book, or they have some perverse sense of loyalty to another company, which is ridiculous. That being said, The first time I got on this bike and I rode it and I felt how tight it shifted. The gearbox on it is not like the buttery smooth of some of the big touring bikes. It's kind of clunky, but not clunky in a bad way, and certainly not clunky in a Harley way. It ain't that clunky. But it shifts smooth enough. It's enough to where under your foot and above your foot when you shift, you know you've shifted gears. There's no guessing if you made it or not. There are no false neutrals in this gearbox at all. So far, so good. So let's talk about the cons of owning a European motorcycle in America. And I'm going to tell you there are a few of them, and I've experienced some of them, not in a radical way, but they are there. And I think anyone buying a motorcycle, when you're spending that kind of money, you need to be aware of these things. First off, let's talk about dealer network. The dealer network for Triumph is way better than it used to be, and it's certainly better than Ducati. Ducati is a bike that when I looked at those, that's one of the primary reasons, that and BMW, that I did not buy something from either one of those companies. In fact, not only has Ducati got a smaller dealer network, they're closing dealers down. They're pulling the dealership away from people if they're not selling predominantly Ducati. They want their dealers only selling Ducati. They don't want them selling other European motorcycles. And I think that is going to end up shooting Ducati in the foot if they're not careful. Now, but dealer network, when you start looking at, say, the dealer network for Honda and Yamaha, Triumph can't hold a candle to that. So you know that if you're out riding and you're a long way from home, you better have AAA or something, because if something does happen, you're probably not going to find a local wrench that's going to be able to throw a hand on that thing and really get it running quickly. So dealer network is definitely something to take into consideration. Another thing is parts accessibility. I was actually very, very disappointed when I first got the bike. I wanted to get the Aero Lowboy exhaust for it that was made specifically by Aero for this motorcycle, only to find out that it was only made for like a year or two and they no longer make it. So something that Triumph created specifically for this bike, it just isn't available. You just can't find it because they don't make it anymore. I find that kind of thing very frustrating and very short-sighted. Coming from a Harley background, you can get Harley parts everywhere. And that accessibility, you know what? I took advantage of that ease. Another thing about parts, they cost a little more. The mirrors that you see on my bike, the bar end mirrors, it took me 2 months to get those mirrors. I ended up dropping close to $200 for a pair of mirrors. I can tell you the bar end mirrors I had on my Harley that hung upside down from my ape hangers, I probably didn't pay 40 or 50 bucks for those things at a swap meet. And they worked every bit as well, and were absolutely, the quality was just as quality as what I paid for these. And I got them quicker and for a quarter of the cost. So cost of parts is something to think about. For the sport bike people in the world, I don't think that you're going to have to think about tires and that sort of stuff. Those sorts of things are very generic. But when you do start talking about specific motorcycle parts, they're just not going to be as easy to find. So dealer network and parts. And that brings us to the elephant in the room, dependability. Everything I've read about dependability of the Triumph motorcycles, it leaves a little to be desired. Now, I have not had any dependability issues. That said, when I bought it, because it was an older bike, it had a battery issue. The dealer stepped right up to the plate and got me a new battery, and I ended up having no problems. They put a new battery in it. But even then, I had to wait a little while for it. So now, the pros. Are there pros? I'm going to tell you, nothing rides like this motorcycle. Nothing I've ever owned, and I've owned a lot of motorcycles. I've owned dirt bikes, I've owned enduros, I've owned tours, I've owned cruisers, I've owned pretty much any of the regular motorcycles, which I call just the old, like the GS 750s and the KZs and the Zs. I've owned these bikes, and I will tell you that absolutely nothing I've ever owned compares to this motorcycle. And I didn't make this video immediately because I wanted the new to wear off. I didn't want to go into this thing saying, well, it's the greatest, only because I'm excited about getting a new toy. So I waited a while. I've had this thing 7 months. I put 3,000 miles on it, and the bike rides great. It rides like nothing before that I have ever been on anyway. The bike pulls like a train. The power band is absolutely unbelievable. Power wheelies and clutch up wheelies are just natural on the motorcycle. And I'm not a wheelie guy, but let me tell you, if I can do a wheelie, anybody can. The bike is an absolute wheelie machine. Stopping wise, the bike stops in an absolutely superlative fashion. You know how a motorcycle squats down when it stops and gets all unstable. Well, I'm going to tell you, I've had to stop pretty fast a couple of times on this thing, and it has greatly exceeded any expectation that I had for it, and certainly is far more superior to anything that I've ever owned. The bike stops amazingly well. Handling, overall handling, I can tell you the bike will do way more than I can. If you've seen any videos of the back of my motorcycle, you can see the chicken strips. I don't really worry about that kind of stuff. I go out, I ride, I do some stupid things, but by and large, I try to be as safe as I possibly can. And I've almost killed myself 2 or 3 times being an idiot. So, you know, the bike will perform, it will turn, it will stop, it will accelerate. Gas mileage is what you would expect. I get around 30, 35 miles per gallon. I'm on it a lot though, I'm not gonna lie to you. 0 to 60 is boom, you're there. In fact, you're normally 0 to 85 and then you're slowing back down to 60 because it just happens so quick. You're just there. So the bike, if you start looking at all of the pros to owning it, it's cool looking. It's got a cool branding on it. The fit and finish is awesome. The performance is great. The braking is great. I can tell you, if you can pick up a 2015 Speed Triple, and they're out there, because I was looking, I know. They're out there, and if you can pick those things up pretty cheap, $6,000 to $8,500, you're buying a bike that is going to be everything that you could possibly imagine it be, and much, much more probably. The bike is wonderful, and if I could go back and do it all over again, I would hands down purchase exactly the bike I bought. I was always told as a boy, it's not enough to have what you want. You got to want what you have. And let me tell you, this motorcycle, I have it and I want it. And every day when I walk by it in that garage, when I don't have an opportunity to ride, I regret the fact that today I'm too busy, because I would ride it all the time. And as far as being able, your riding position and being able to ride this thing for any extended periods of time, I rode from Tallahassee to Daytona in one day, and then I rode around Daytona and did a couple of extra trips out visiting people, and then rode home. So one day was a 270 mile day, the next day was a 400 plus mile day, and it was no problem for me. And I'm 57 years old with knee and back pain. So if I can do it, anyone can do it. As far as size, the physical size of the motorcycle, I'm 6'2" with a 34-inch inseam, and the bike fits me just fine. So I can say, Coach Bob gives the Speed Triple 2 thumbs up. So go see a local Triumph dealer. Tell them Coach Bob sent you, and buy you a new motorcycle. You deserve it. See you next time.